We're continuing our look through the Chaos Bespoke warbands, and today I am having a look at the Chaos Legionnaires. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you all doing today? Chaos Legionnaires are a warband that I have a lot of issues with, mostly around the fact that they are statistically very interesting, but in terms of fun, they're a little bit lacking because the ability lineup is a little bit naff. But since Briar and Bone, things have changed because they now have a battle trait, and as we'll see, it might be one of the best battle traits in the entire game. But before we get into all of that, it's time for a little bit of shilling.
I am shocked. Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
Please consider leaving a like, a comment, and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members, or using my Element Games affiliate link down below when buying some new Warcry gubbins. A huge shout out to my patrons and members who you can find on screen now. Badoosh. But with all of that out of the way, it's time to get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
And we are back, and we're going to start with their battle trait, which is called Master Manipulators. And oh my gosh, it's a doozy. When determining who has initiative, but not when seizing the initiative, if there is a tie, do not roll off. Instead, the player of this warband chooses which tied player has the initiative. If multiple warbands have this battle trait, you just roll off. So why is Master Manipulator so good? It gives you control over a phase of the game that no other warband can really interact with meaningfully beyond just spending wild dice, right? You don't just get initiative, you get to pick who has initiative. And this has lots of ramifications. Firstly, you can just pick yourself, spend your wild dice, and gain the advantages of picking first. However, you can also just pass this to your opponent, and then they've got to spend their wild dice first, and that's information that you can glean that you might not have otherwise been able to, right? You're able to then see what they're spending their dice on. The onus is on them to maintain the initiative or spend their wild dice to gain abilities, which means you are more likely to then seize the initiative. Or if you simply don't want the initiative, but you want to see what your opponent's going to spend their wild dice on in advance, well, you can do that and then spend yours accordingly. And on both sides of this, going first or going second does have ramifications in certain missions that allow you to interact and control the game in unique ways. The most obvious one that springs to mind is ley lines, because the person who goes second has complete control over which objectives are active. You completely control the game, and Chaos Legion become disproportionately advantaged when playing into ley lines because they have greater control over the initiative phase as a whole, thanks to their battle trait. Now, the biggest downside to the battle trait and all battle traits is that you can't take allies, thralls, monsters, or bladeborn if you want to use this battle trait. And that is just the biggest hurdle across, because Chaos Legion kind of need a bit of help in multiple areas, and allies fix those issues. But if you take allies, then you don't get this really cool battle trait, which I genuinely believe is one of the better battle traits in the game. It has so much utility, and once you actually get to start using it and you're not just existing in this theoretical space, and you actually get hands-on with this battle trait, it offers so much control, and I love it. It's just hard to justify taking, and we'll get into that kind of now with the abilities and the reactions. And the reaction is called Call to Arms. A fighter can make this reaction when an enemy fighter ends their move action visible to this fighter and within 3 inches of this fighter. Pick another friendly fighter within 3 inches of this fighter. That fighter makes a bonus move action. After that move action, that fighter must be within 1 inch of the enemy fighter that made the move action. This basically allows your chaffy units to make your other things nearby move into combat without using their actions. This is fantastic because it works on allies. So if you've got a really powerful Chaos ally, well, they can move in, especially if they are fast, because it is a full move action. If they're moving 10, they get to move their full 10 inches. And there's a lot of play when you start moving faster allies, because then you can move beyond that fighter and still remain within 1 inch. You just move completely around and you've gained a lot of distance for free, in addition to just getting into combat. And the final little bit of sauce here is that it can be activated once an enemy fighter ends a move action within 3 inches of your guy, which means they don't even have to be engaged with you to use this. They could have a spear or a flail or just not want to get into combat. Well, tough, they've moved within 3 inches, your guy gets to move in, now they're in combat, right? Then they're forced to deal with you. Maybe you've now blocked off a future move where they want to move onto an objective, but now they can't because they can't make it because you've engaged them, they must disengage. There's all kinds of little weird ways Call to Arms works really, really well. It's definitely a reaction you want to keep in the back of your mind because it is a fantastic mobility and control piece that has a lot more use outside of I'm just going to get into combat and hit, despite being the most obvious use case and a fairly handy one because getting more damage off is always fantastic, especially when you start seeing some of the stats on your guys. It's pretty darn fun. So big fan of this reaction, and overall once you look at the battle trait and their reaction, the Chaos Legion are off to a fantastic start. Nearly every ability in the Chaos Legion are tied to specific units. The only thing that is generic to all Chaos Legion is their reaction and their quad, Wrath of the First Prince. It reads, this fighter makes a bonus attack action. In addition, a number of hits scored by that attack action equal to half the value of this ability, rounding up, become critical hits instead. For example, if the value of the ability was a 6, 3 hits scored by that attack action would become critical hits instead. This is a really fun quad. I don't think it's necessarily better than the utility you gain from things like Rampage, because that free move's pretty good. But when you consider things like Call to Arms, you might get into combat for free anyway, then you get a bonus attack action, and that attack action starts to spike like crazy on your guys, because some of your guys have pretty darn good crit, and it can go even higher if you start blessing them with crit. So Wrath of the First Prince is really bursty. It can just come out of nowhere and just start deleting things you want dead. But of course, it is a quad. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the abilities I really like in Chaos Legion when it pops off. So again, I am a fan, and all this naysaying I've been saying doesn't really seem to add up. And this is going to continue to be the case looking at the Decuriarch, because the Decuriarch is actually pretty good. This guy's 170 points, movement 4, toughness 5, 22 wounds, 4425. This guy is absolutely fine. He's one of the very few bespoke leaders in the game with toughness 5. He's not too expensive at 170. 22 wounds is fantastic. It takes him above the usual 20 wound mark, so he takes like an extra hit or 2 before he goes down. Throw him that toughness 5 again, then he's just hard at hit in general. And in melee, 4425 is an absolutely fine profile for just scrapping away at things, right? Throw in Wrath of the First Prince with his crit 5 and his 4 attacks. This guy can start popping off out of nowhere. He's just a really solid leader, and he comes with some pretty funky abilities, although the first one is a double called Shield Ram. This one ain't that great. Until the end of this fighter's activation, the next time this fighter finishes a move action within 1 inch of an enemy fighter, pick a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter and roll a dice. On a 4 to a 5, allocate 1 damage to that fighter, and roll a 6, deal dice value damage. This is a really generic ability, and there's better versions of it in other Chaos Warbands, right? You roll 1 dice, and on a 4+, you do 1 damage. Like, that's just not good. This is just a straight downgrade to using something like Onslaught a lot of the time. And when you consider the Decuriarch himself is damage 2, and he's likely hit on a 4+ or a 5+ anyway, you don't really gain anything. Just use Onslaught. You'll likely do more damage, and sure, on a 6, you might do up to 6 damage, but if you roll 6 on an Onslaught dice, dude's doing 5 anyway. So Shield Ram on the Decuriarch really doesn't do much. It's just kind of crap, honestly. Unless you really need to run 8 inches across the board and like Hail Mary that like big old spike on that roll of a 6 to kill something 9 inches away, right? And that's like a use case. But the Decuriarch as a whole really doesn't get much out of this. Other models within the Chaos Legion might, as we'll get to in a bit, but the Decuriarch really just has this because he has a shield, right? It fits because he has a shield. But the Decuriarch has 2 more abilities, because this guy has 3 usable abilities, which is half of the abilities within the Chaos Legion, more than half if you count the quad, which is kind of bonkers. And the second double is actually really, really good. It's called Dark Pact. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 12 inches of this fighter. So nice and long range there. Roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability. For each 3+, allocate 1 damage to that fighter. After all the dice have been rolled, allocate D3 damage points to yourself, basically. And Dark Pact is just outstanding. It's so good at pipping off wounds of things with really high toughness because you're hitting on a 3+. It's really good at killing things that are near death. It's really good at just reaching out and impacting the game in ways that your opponent doesn't want you to. And yes, you take D3 damage. You might actually take more damage on yourself than you do to your opponent. That's the risk you take. It's also technically being power crept a little bit with the twist wheel, but their order, we don't think about that. That doesn't have any impact on the Dark Pact itself. The Dark Pact as an ability is fantastic, so good. I often take 2 Decuriarchs because their stance is fantastic. This ability allows me to burn it multiple times per turn and allows me to potentially impact the whole board. Don't let that 1 damage or the self damage like put you off it. You will use Dark Pact all the time, and you will absolutely love it once you start using it. Going on to this guy's last ability, the True Master's Favor, and this is super generic. A fighter can use this ability only if an enemy fighter has been taken down by an attack action made by them this activation. Until the end of the battle round, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of melee attack actions made by friendly fighters while they are within 9 inches of this fighter. This is a really good ability in Chaos Legion because your attack number is fairly low, right? Your guys have like 3 across the board, basically, and you kind of want to have more. And if you can get the True Master's Favor of having a big 9-inch bubble that everyone gets +1 attack, right? It's good. It helps other abilities within the Chaos Legion, which we'll get to in a little bit, and it's just a handy buff. The issue is you have to get a kill, and the Decuriarch kind of struggles to do that without using abilities beforehand. This guy likes to use Onslaught, he likes to use things like Dark Pact, he likes to use things like Wrath of the First Prince. So the occasions where you get to use the True Master's Favor are pretty low, but the effect is pretty strong, so if you see an opportunity to pop it, then definitely go for it. But it is low on tempo, it is very expensive, and you might completely whiff the kill, and you'll be kicking yourself because you wished you'd used Onslaught instead. So then be the risks you take. But overall, the Decuriarch is wonderful. He's one of the highlights of the Chaos Legion. He's just such a solid leader, and he's just an all-around solid guy to have as an ally, surprisingly, because he's cheap, he's durable, he's good in combat. He's got range projection, he has access to the reaction, he's got access to their quad. The guy has a lot of things going for him for his fairly low price, and taking 2 is a common thing you will see within Chaos Legion because they are just so darn efficient. I absolutely love the Decuriarch, and funny enough, we've only had positives still, which is a little bit silly when you consider that I said the Chaos Legion have some pretty glaring flaws. We've yet to see a single one, bar Shield Ram, right? So that's a bit unusual. The Mutandor is next up, and again, I'm making myself out to be a bit of a liar here. The Mutandor's kind of fine, right? This guy's pretty darn funky. 145 points, movement 5, nice and fast. Toughness 4, 18 wounds, really good wound count. Range 2, 3-5-2-5 on the offense. And the Mutandor is pretty darn swanky. At 145 points, he is a little bit expensive. He's really paying for that movement 5, right? His attack stats are a little bit low. You would really like to see like a 3-5 damage here as opposed to the 2-5, but the 2-5 is fine. Where the Mutandor really shines is as a secondary form of 12-inch threat projection, similar to Dark Pact. The Mutandor has a triple called Headlong Charge. A fighter can only use this ability if they're within 2 inches of an enemy fighter and have made 2 move actions this activation. This fighter makes a bonus attack action with its spear. This means the Mutandor can move 10 inches and then stab someone 2 inches away with a spear for a bonus attack action on a triple, and that's good for just projecting your threat. And because Mutandor has that 2-inch range and 18 wounds, the guy is surprisingly durable. And of course, having a movement 5 piece in general is always quite nice for objective play and for treasure play, and being able to do damage when you run in is pretty good. Now, of course, the big downside is you have to do 2 move actions. Those move actions could be absolutely tiny. You could move like an inch and then like half an inch as 2 separate move actions, and then you're good to go, right? You don't have to move the full 10 inches to pull this off. You could just kind of like have a little and and then you do it. And that's totally fine, as long as those moves were legal, of course. So headlong charge is really fun, and the Mutandor is kind of fine. I unfortunately tend to drop him because 145 is a little bit steep for these attack stats when you look at the next guys, the Hornhelms. And the Hornhelms are like 20 to 25 points cheaper, and the Hornhelms are like legitimately pretty darn threatening. So we have two variants, the Steel Bite Axe and the Dark Iron Mace. They're both movement 4, toughness 4 with 18 wounds, which again, really high wound count, big fan of that. And they are a 3-5-2-6 on that axe and a 3-4-3-5 on that mace. And these guys are really nice. The Steel Bite Axe is completely fine by himself. If you take the Steel Bite Axe, you can absolutely just operate with your 3 attacks and strength 5 and try and bank on those crits coming out to start doing massive damage. The Dark Iron Mace needs a little bit more help to be more reliable. That strength 4 does let it down. So slap on +1 strength. He goes to 135 points for a 3-5-3-5. That's a great offensive profile. 18 wounds is a fantastic mid-range wound count to be at, and 135 points is totally in line with other things of similar damage profiles in other bespoke warbands, such as the Best Ego Destroyer, which springs to mind off the top of my head. As a final little stat jiggle, the Hornhelm with Steel Bite Axe really likes to have +1 crits. I love this guy being a 2-7 because then you have your quad caddy, right? Being strength 5 means he's fairly reliable swinging in on things. Being crit 7 means he's doing like 7, 14, potentially 21 damage on a quad, which is kind of spicy. So I do find myself having one little Steel Bite Axe in my warbands just to be there to just spike people down on a quad occasionally. But overall, I am a bigger fan of that Dark Iron Mace because that minimum 3 damage is just so nice to deal with. You're less vulnerable to things like Unfeeling Flesh or Brute Resilience, right? You don't get knocked down to 1 damage. If someone reacts, you still have your 3-5, you go down with 2-5. And that's still a respectable profile. That's a profile that the Mutandor has, which is, again, a fine profile. So the Hornhelms are cheap enough, they're durable, and their attack stats are completely fine. They do have an ability, and their ability is not great. It's fun to use, but you kind of want to avoid it because it's just use Onslaught, right? As you add half the value of this ability rounding up to the damage points allocated by each critical hit from the next attack action made by this fighter. This is so unreliable with guys who have 3 attacks. Never use this. Even if you get that big +3, right? Going to a crit 10 potentially on a blessed Steel Bite Axe. That sounds great. You'll never roll that crit. It doesn't happen. Just use Onslaught. Try and get some more reliable damage out. Brutal Swing is funny to think about, but in reality, it's a little bit pants, right? And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention the fact that these guys really like call to arms. You want to use your lesser guys to move your Hornhelm into combat so they can attack twice with their big old meaty swings. Call to arms was basically designed to get the Hornhelms in, and they do very well with it if they are supported. And speaking of support, you will support these guys with your Hornshields, and you have 3 variants, and they are all largely kind of the same. And you'll pick one based on how many points you've got left over, because these guys are 95 or 100 points with a movement 4, toughness 5, and 12 wounds across the board. And their attack stats vary fairly wildly. So at 100 points, you get the mace for a 3-4-2-4. That's an absolutely fine profile. The axe is a 3-5-1-4 at 95 points. And again, absolutely fine, right? Strength 5 really helps as you can just do more reliable damage on bigger things. Sure, your actual damage numbers are a little bit lower, but you're more likely to hit, and you're also 5 points cheaper, which is something to bear in mind. And then this Hornshield with sword, I just don't like. He's a 4-4-1-3, and I'm sure that statistically he's probably on par with the axe. I just like having strength 5 over strength 4. I like having the extra crit, even though I'm losing an attack, right? I prefer the axe's stat line for that cost. And when I take my Hornshields, I basically go, how many points do I left over? I'm going to fill this with Hornshields with maces because 3424 on a toughness 5 platform is really, really nice. These guys are very close to being Ard Boys in stats. They're slightly faster with slightly less wounds for the same price and the same damage output. Okay, they're really solid. They don't have the really fun abilities of Ard Boys. They do have comparable stats and point cost. These are your durable back row, and it really rounds out the Chaos Legion as a surprisingly durable mid-range warband who have some pretty good melee chops. That, like, statistically, all of these guys are absolutely fine. And like I said, their abilities are a bit bland, right? The Hornshields also gain the Shield Bash. They're arguably better using Shield Bash than the Decuriarch because they have lower damage. So it's been a lot of positives. Decuriarch's good, Mutandor's good, Hornhelm's both good, Hornshield's also good. So where does the Chaos Legion go wrong? And it's that they're just a little bit bland because you don't use Shield Ram, you don't use Brutal Swings. The Mutandor is weird, so if you don't take the Mutandor, you don't take the Headlong Charge because he's a little bit expensive. You rarely, if ever, use True Master's Favor, and quads are unreliable, and there's definitely the argument that Rampage is just going to be better because of the utility Rampage brings. So what does that leave you in terms of actual abilities you use within Chaos Legion? It's just Dark Pact, right? And as good and fun and useful as Dark Pact is, when 5 of your 6 abilities are kind of just mid or bad and Dark Pact just stands out as the only thing really worth using en masse, in addition to like Rush and Onslaught and other generic universal abilities, it puts a damper on playing the Chaos Legion because all of their awesome stats, all of their wonderful durability, right? These guys can definitely do work on the battlefield. Not massively top tier. Let's not push the ball too far, right? They're not like top tier, like mid tier, right? Comfortably mid tier, and that's because of their raw stats. But like just having raw stats isn't, in my opinion, that fun to deal with. It really puts a damper on any game I play with them because I really want to like them. I really like Hornhelms. I really like their battle tree. I really like Call to Arms. These guys can absolutely one box and do fine. They're 8 models, all durable, all decent in combat, right? This is a really solid warband to play with. They are super simple to deal with. They are just nice and smashy and durable and just a great time if that's what you want. They're fantastic for learning the game because there's not all that much you have to think about beyond who am I going to Dark Pact, who am I going to Call to Arms, and who's going to get a mace to the face. And that's fun in its own right, especially for new players. But for me, I like a bit more interest, a bit more intrigue in my actual abilities, and these guys largely lack that. Now, going on to allies, I am just not going to bother. I have done so many videos on Chaos Bespokes and Chaos Warbands, and the advice ultimately ends up being the same every time. If you want to be competitive, then you take the best Chaos allies, and the best Chaos allies are Foam-Red Crushers. They are Varangard, they are Vexmore. All 3, in my opinion, are kind of boring. All 3 are literally everywhere, but they are good, and Vexmore in particular is a fantastic replacement for that Mutandor, because despite Vexmore being slow, he's tougher, he's more durable, he does more damage, and he can be called to arms to get into combat, which means he can roll more dice and swing more swings and kill more things. So Vexmore does undeniably work really, really well here. The biggest downside when it comes to allies into Chaos Legion is just that they don't have chaff. These guys have 100 point, 95 point chaff. These aren't chaff, these are mid-range things. These are durable, good, mid-range stuff. So you can't just fill out your warband with chaff because you don't have any. So your ally game is noticeably restrictive compared to, say, the Spire Tyrants, compared to, say, Corvus Cabal, right, who have much cheaper chaff, which is just a thing you'll have to deal with. Before I end this video, I am going to slap down a list for you to use, and I am going to purposely not put allies on this list. I really want to encourage people to try Master Manipulator as the battle trait because it is really, really good, and it does help the Chaos Legion do something interesting. It's in the initiative phase, but it is interesting. It's one of the most interesting things they can do, and that really helps me when I'm playing my games. So when it comes to lists, I would take something like this. Badoosh. So I would take 2 Decuriarchs, a Mutandor, 3 Hornhelms with dark iron maces, and a Hornshield with axe. For my blessings, I would put +1 strength on all of those Hornhelms, and either +4 wounds on that Hornshield, or +1 move on that Mutandor. The extra wounds on the Hornshield means that your like one little chaff guy can just survive an extra hit or 2, and the +1 move on the Mutandor makes his triple even more impactful because now he goes to a 14-inch threat range and has an 8-inch threat range when just moving and attacking normally. This list is fairly durable. Pretty much everything here, bar that axe Hornshield, is a legitimate threat thanks to strength 5, 3/5 damage. And those 2 Decuriarchs means you can start bouncing off dark packs and alternate between them to avoid taking too many wounds on those Decuriarchs. And that's it, that's Chaos Legionnaires, that's the end of this video. If you liked what you saw, leave a comment down below, hit like and subscribe, wherever those buttons may be. And until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.
Groovy.
Hey all and welcome to the post-toast credits. A massive shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, blah blah blah, the Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Maps, Sable Saber, Steph, Steve Bean, the Houston Toad, Tough, Tootin' Baby, and Velas. A huge thank you for supporting the channel, and I will catch you all next time. Ta-ra!